Hello and welcome once again to the Theatre of War. We'd like to present to you our film of the war game recreating the action at Lexington and Concord in April 1775. The game was in fact a series of 5 games staged over 7 days at the end of April 2025 to represent the major features of this historic recreation. We hope you enjoy the video and the photos as much as we did in playing the game, and if you did enjoy them, please click the like and subscribe button at the end. It is free of charge, of course, so thanks for that. There will be a debrief, a short debrief at the end of the video with a map that we prepared just to explain the salient points of the action. Thank you. So here we have, you see the Grenadier column on the road there. Here is North Bridge and the light infantry skirmishing with rebel militia. On the road you can see the Grenadiers forming up on the Lexington road, the road to Lexington, and they're going to start falling back to Boston. Out to the left flank here you've got light infantry who are out in force trying to drive the rebel militia back. The rebel militia keep melting away from the light infantry. Grenadier column on the road there, they're just about setting off. Behind them is light infantry with Pitcairn, Major Pitcairn of the Marines in command of them. You can see the light infantry out there. Far off you can see rebel militia. Grenadier column again. There's the Mill Pond in Concord, and again over on the far right flank you see 2 companies of light infantry that are moving ahead against light infantry. Another view of North Bridge. Again, final view from Concord itself towards the Grenadier column moving out. You can see Lieutenant Colonel Smith ahead. One of the players moving up the light infantry. They're going to try and close with the rebel militia. There's Major Pitcairn, and here's the Grenadier column with, as I said, Lieutenant Colonel Smith ahead pointing. There's a final view of the Grenadier column and Concord. The action has now moved to the first major ambush point of the day at Merriam's Corner. It's the intersection of the Bedford and Lexington Road. You can see the Grenadier column on the right, still flanked by the light infantry, and they are becoming increasingly aggressive in attacking the rebel militia. Many more rebels have gathered here, converging in growing numbers from many places in Massachusetts. The firing is general and much heavier than at Concord, with casualties on both sides steadily rising. That's the 63rd the light infantry company, the 63rd, attacking the rebels who are trying to block the road. Bayonet point, basically. That's what the British have been resorting to quite a lot in trying to drive the rebels back. You can see the rebels are now almost completely surrounding the column and keeping them at bay is increasingly difficult. and the rebels are becoming much bolder and getting closer to the British to inflict more damage. That's Merriam's house on the Bedford Road, and each body of rebels is yet another militia company. They all operate without an overall commander, and they can prove really elusive. And you can see a view now from the other end of the column. Down at the bottom of your picture, you can see a large unit or units of rebels, and there's the 63rd, the light infantry of the 63rd regiment are going to bayonet charge them. There's rebels on both flanks. You can see there's a lot of rolling gunfire there, and the casualties are definitely mounting. There's Major Pitcairn in amongst the light infantry, as he usually is. He's a Marine officer, but he is in overall command of the light infantry companies, and in charge of them you can see dear old Lieutenant Colonel Smith at the head of the Grenadier column at the back there. we've now arrived at Bloody Angles, and you can see the whole British column here. It's the Grenadiers, light infantry out on the flanks. You can see the casualty figures laying about because the casualties have increased quite considerably. Now, this place got the infamous name of the Bloody Angles because you can see the roads going on different angles, and it's got heights above it. You'll see in the map at the end this particular position, and it did get the name the Bloody Angles because that's where the rebels were able to oversee the British, as I hope you can see that from the video here, and it was extremely difficult for the British at this point. So it didn't last very long, but it was a narrow defile that was a real choke point, and the rebels were able to really have a go at the British. And you can see there, if you look carefully, you can see the muskets of the light infantry pointing up at the rebels on the height above them. But here we see where the rebels are preparing further fusillades along the road when the column finally gets that much further up the Lexington road. So it really is it's the repetition of what's been going on in the previous two locations, Concord and of course Merriam's Corner, and this will happen now until the British can finally break free and end up emerging or not at Boston. So here's a view from behind the rebel lines towards the British column coming along the Lexington road. We didn't add any smoke here, by the way. We have on some of the other shots, but we wanted to sort of get these photos done. It sounds like we're rushing, but we wanted to get these photos done and then move the action on, because we were running out of time in this particular action. Because remember, these are different games. This is the third game that we made. So there you have it. So I shall let the music speak for itself, and then we'll go on to show you some still shots of this particular action. I think there's a few more shots from behind the rebel lines here. Again, it's up on the heights. Now, I don't know whether the camera is going to give you the correct perspective here. It's always difficult in miniature, but essentially, if you recall briefly from earlier in this shot, they were above, and here they are above, looking down on the British column. Here we can see the British column has progressed to Lexington, where the first shots were fired earlier today. This is the Grenadier column, as usual, flanked by the light infantry, and right at the back of the column you can see a line of skirmishers who are trying to ward off the Americans who are coming up from behind them. Off in the distance there you can see across the fields the
Americans, or rather the rebels, who are blasting away at the British. And then as we pan around and move into Lexington village itself, there's the schoolhouse, and you can see the rebels around that. And also, they're not rebels around it, they are in fact British light infantry. They're exchanging shots with rebels further in by the church. That's Lexington Green, where the first action took place at dawn. And that is Buckman's Tavern, and in front of Buckman's Tavern you can see congregated the remnants of Captain Parker's company, who at dawn this morning were driven off the green with losses. They went away, as all the militia seem to be doing, and come rallying back. And you can see going off up the road there towards that's the Boston Road, and there are troops coming down the Boston Road. That's Buckman's Tavern in the middle there. And the other thing that you can see here is that, I'll zoom in slightly, the British have actually, the light infantry, as you can see, are sort of milling about in the village there, but they've set light to two houses. These belong to the Harrington brothers. One is the left hand one is Daniel Harrington, and the right hand house is Jonathan Harrington. And you can see, as I say, that as I'm pan across here, you can see there's quite a, as is usual in this action, that has been a continual running battle between the British, of course. There's another view of the column of British, and here's a view behind the rebel lines. You can see again there's a whole bunch of militiamen, rebel militia, who've formed up and are blazing away at the British light infantry over there, who are exchanging with them. You've got more rebels coming up the road here into the middle of Lexington, congregating on Lexington Green, and over here you've got more rebels who are also moving towards the centre of Lexington. They're the troops coming down the road. That's Buckman's Tavern, and it just generally, as is being the case throughout the action, the British are, if you like, surrounded and having to fight with the rebels all the way. Here's a view behind the rebel lines in Lexington, and you can see in the centre there Buckman's Tavern. You can see also the stable block there, and you can see the light infantry who've set light to the two houses in the middle. You can see the smoke billowing out at the top, and over to the right is the column of British Grenadiers and light infantry. And here behind, we go behind the rebel lines here, and you can see the view that they have across to the redcoats, the Bloodybacks, and this is behind the Yankee lines, the rebel lines, and you can see they're massing and firing onto the British. That's the British, that's behind the two Harrington houses. That's the blacksmith shop there, and just panning round there, moving again out of the village. Again you can see what the rebel lines look like. So that just gives you a view of the action. We've stopped here just to let you see this. We won't take any more film in Lexington. Next bit of film will be at a place called Menotomy, which these days is known as Arlington. Okay, so this is the final action of the game, and we've taken a pause here just to show you the British advance into towards Boston, of course, but they've been reinforced by Lord Percy's brigade. You can see Lord Percy at the head of the column there. He's now taken control from Smith, or command from Smith. They've got two light 6-pounders, which are absolutely excellent artillery pieces. They were the best infantry artillery pieces in North America during the war. Very light, very manoeuvrable, and ideal for a situation like this. You can see the light infantry have driven in, routed the rebel militia on that side of the village, and over here they've also routed and surrounded virtually the rebel militia. You can see the musketry occurring there. So the column then is able to advance into Monotony, which is nowadays known as Arlington. That's the centre of the village. There's the church there, and then you can see there's a road which leads up to Bedford, and from Bedford you can see some reinforcements arriving here. Column led over the I think it's the Mystic River. Here there's a little bridge, little trestle bridge, and that's the road in. They're going to try and attack the British in the flank. Here you can see some skirmishing on the flank. The British light infantry have been out all day inflicting losses on the rebels. It's very, very difficult for the British to tell what the losses are on the rebel side, because they melt away into the distance. There's a little shot of the churchyard, and behind the stone wall in the churchyard is another company of rebel militia. Back over here you can see the British column. The relieving column is composed of four full battalions. So it's about 1,500 men in total, plus the couple of guns. They brought no light infantry because the light infantry companies were already deployed with Smith. You can see battalions in what is termed open order on the countryside to traverse the fields in column, and on the road they're in close order. And at the end of the column you can see the dear old grenadiers who've suffered all day and have taken lots of casualties, and more casualties you can see laying on the side of the road. They're diminished in numbers now. They've probably lost about a third of their strength overall, but nevertheless they're still jolly and marching along the road. And the light infantry have done an absolutely sterling job keeping the rebels at bay. The rebels keep melting away and coming back for more. There's another unit that's been routed in the middle of the township of Monotony, or Arlington as it is, as I say, known today. You can see the British artillery there has opened fire and has blasted two of the buildings, or is starting to do damage. In reality, I believe there was quite let's say a massacre here, but the British stormed into buildings and bayoneted anyone that they found in there, because as far as they were concerned, any building contained rebels, and they were popping up behind them and on the flanks of them and taking pot shots. So anyone was fair game for a good bayoneting, and of course the rebels don't have bayonets. And in the rules that we use, Bloodybacks and Yankees do take account of that fact, and the rebels have a terrible time when they don't have bayonets. Some of the rebel militia may have tomahawks, but that doesn't really do them any good when they're facing troops with bayonets, which is why they keep breaking. And you'll notice in earlier photographs and film of this action, you will see that the rebels tend to break fairly easily. These are not regular troops, these rebels. They're drilled, trained, a bit like Dad's army in the UK during the World War II. They're older men, younger lads, and some shopkeepers and so on, but they aren't regular soldiers, so up against regular soldiers they really are going to find it very, very tough. Here's what it looks like behind the rebel lines. You can see a line of a company of rebel militia there, more coming up. These are all arriving from the direction of Boston. They've come in from all over the countryside, and you can see here columns of them arriving to try and do battle with the British. And quite a fierce action here. This is the reason we're terminating the game at this point, is because in essence the battle is now over, because once the British reach the junction of the Cambridge and Boston Neck Road, Percy took a wise decision to actually go for the Boston Neck, and he ended up on outside Charleston or Charlestown, and he the men bedded down for the night. Once they got there, there'll be an explanation at the end of the game. There'll be just a short bit that I'll explain the real action and what happened in this battle. But as you can see, the rebels are making a real try of resisting the British, but it's extremely difficult for them, because I'm focusing in there on the action at the rail fence there. You can see the British light infantry ever trying to close with the rebels, and this is why the rebels have successive lines, because they have to fall back. They're exchanging musketry. You can see British casualties there, plenty of rebel casualties now. It wasn't so earlier in the battle, and there's the British column heading up the road, and effectively going to push on towards Boston along this road where the rebels are now. We're pretty certain we'll fight a little bit more of this action, but essentially this is we've reached the end of the battle, because the rebels aren't going to be able to stand before the British regulars. So a view of the high ground outside of Monotony, and as you can see, successive lines of rebel troops, more there, loading the woods here, and over towards, there's the river, I believe, as I say, it's the Mystic. I'll check that out. I'm pretty sure it is the Mystic River, and there are the reinforcements coming over the bridge from Bedford, I think. And so there we are, that's the end of the action, and we'll just finish by panning in to the middle of Monotony, Arlington.
And so the British finally reached Bunker Hill near Charlestown, rested for the night, and then were ferried across to Boston and final safety. The rebels missed a golden opportunity to seal the fate of the British by intercepting them before they crossed Charlestown Neck. The British warships in the Charles River Basin kept the rebel militia from the almost suicidal attempt at getting across the neck. Even had the rebels done so, if you like, the British in formal battle order would have proved a totally different prospect from the affairs of the preceding 18 hours. Naturally, the rebels demurred. And so here's the map which will show you or allow you to orient yourselves properly with the action that you've just seen, and also with the historical reality.
Okay, so this is clearly the Charlestown Road. So the British marched up here all the way and arrived at Lexington at about, I think, 5 o'clock in the morning. They had an exchange on the green, which is here. You can see the church and everything else that's mentioned in the video. That's Buckman's Tavern, which is mentioned in the video. That lasted only moments. And then after Smith, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, had got the troops into order, they marched up here. They bumped into some militia outside Concord. There's Merriam's Corner. And they actually marched. It was a farcical situation. They marched into Concord with the militia ahead of them playing the same tune on fife and drum. So here's Concord. Smith dispatched troops to North Bridge, about, I think, 5-6 companies of light infantry. Buttrick's farm was the target because the major who owned that farm had supplies there. It's a bit of the foundation mythology that the Americans weren't prepared for this rebellion. They were prepared for a very long time. They'd been in a very provocative mood with the British. There were, I think, not sure whether it was actually under the jail. There were 24-pounders buried in the jail yard. So you don't have 24-pounder cannons. I think there were 3 or 4 of those. There were loads of supplies found at Buttrick's farm. They burnt supplies in the town, and they generally milled about in Concord. There was some troops also at South Bridge, and eventually, very ominously over here, the rebels started gathering, and then the British really got the wind up. The trousers turned brown instead of white, and they decided. Smith got his act together and decided the Grenadiers formed up. You would have seen that in the first episode. And the militia came all the way around here, and that's where the ambush took place when the troops started marching back down the road. Light infantry out here, and Merriam's Corner was the first ambush. They got through that one. That was only just outside Concord, by the way. It's about a mile. When they came down this road, the next big ambush point was, of course, Bloody Angles, and you can see it's all high ground around it. That was depicted in the war game itself. They got through there, suffered quite some casualties, drove off. The woods extend either side here quite thickly. Just to digress very, very quickly, best book that you can possibly get for this action is this book by Arthur B. Turtelot. It's an old book. It was originally published under the title of William Diamond's Drum, but it is the best book. It was a book, it's got the price in the cover there. It was actually 18 quid as a paperback in England, so I don't know how much that would cost nowadays. Anyway, having come from the Bloody Angles, they then marched and they got to back to Lexington, which they'd been in the morning. Now, then what happened, early in the morning, very early, Lieutenant Colonel Smith had realised that he was short-handed, to put it mildly. There'd been lots of alarms going off all around, that's to say gunshots in the dark and everything else. The British had set off in the very early hours of the morning, sometime around about midnight. Took them ages to get across by boat from Boston to the mainland, and they then hung about in the marshes at outside Boston, and then they marched up the road, got to Lexington at 5 o'clock in the morning. As I said, Smith realised that he'd made a real, or he'd not made the error, but an error had been made. He sent off a message. Well, that message took a long time. There was a lot of assembly going on, and eventually, at this point, picked up Lord Percy, who was in command of a brigade of 4 British battalions and 2 light guns, which you saw in the video. They started opening fire at the next point, but they actually, sorry, they didn't open fire at the next point. You'll see them at the next point. But on this hill and this hill, they deployed the 2 light guns, and they actually, those balls, those 6-pound balls, started whistling into the rebel ranks, and they realised they were in for a bigger fight than they actually imagined. So then they retreated all the way back here. By this time, Smith had been superseded in command by his senior officer, who was Lord Percy. They got to Menatomi, and that's where you saw the last action of the game. And they bustled their way through, loads of fighting. There was lots of bayonet action around here, loads of casualties. And eventually, he got to the Percy got to the junction of the Cambridge and Charlestown Road. He decided he'd go this way. He'd actually come in this way in the morning, but he made the very wise decision and went off this way, which meant he could then get on to over the Charlestown Neck, get to outside Charlestown onto famously Bunker Hill, which he did. The troops rested there for the night, and the rest is history. They got over to Boston the next morning, and that was the end of that. Point to make is the casualties in this game were considerably higher than they were in the real battle. What we got was something of the order of double the casualties. So it was very, very serious for the British, because they lost about 380 odd casualties. In the real battle, they lost something 200 and something, and the rebels lost nearly 200 as opposed to 95, I think, in the real battle. So there you have it. So quick pan over. There's Lexington. There's Menatomi. Bloody Angles. And Concord. And we were well supported during the action by Captain Jack Daniels and his mate Bullet Bourbon. So there you go. So it's a real American affair, this. So lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks so much for looking at that video that we shared with you. It was a great deal of fun for us to play the game and to video it and photograph it and so on. So we hope that the results meet with your approval. Just moving on from that, it may not have been obvious or apparent, but we are intending, if we all stay alive long enough, to actually refight the whole of the American War of Independence in real time. So that's to say, we're in the 250th year of 1775, and by a short bit of arithmetic, you'll know that we should be going on until 3033 if you can stick with us. There'll be a lot of other stuff that we'll be doing different periods and so on. But our next battle will be the Battle of Bunker Hill, and that's in about 4 weeks' time. The actual anniversary date is the 17th of June, 1775. So we'll be doing that sometime. I think we're actually going to do the refight on the 19th of June. It may be like this battle that we need a couple of days to extend the action to make a full battle of it. We'll again be using Bloodybacks and Yankees, which is our rule set that we use, written by Fred Burns and Ernie Younger, some old Yankee veterans. So I don't know what that was. We got a message coming through from Fred Burns and Ernie Younger on the other side there. But anyway, so thanks a lot once again. And if you did like it, click the like and subscribe button. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. See you next time about Bunker Hill.